I've been thinking a lot lately about Stellar Blade. And no, not for those reasons, thank you. If there's any kind of discourse we're doing today, it's definitely not that one. Sorry. Instead, I've been thinking about how that game plays, and more specifically, how it feels to play. Given its place in the current zeitgeist of online criticism, and with Stellar Blade as Shift Up Corporation's first ever console game, there's a lot riding on how the title will be received critically. And while the jury is still out on how the game will come together narratively, the current demo has given us enough to chew on for how it comes together mechanically. And based on what I've played, I'm less than a little convinced on its moment-to-moment mechanics. So let's talk about it. Combat, platforming, upgrades, movement. This is Stellar Blade. This is an ode to movement mechanics. This is Save Room. Alright, DualShockers gang, if there's any grain of salt that I have to reiterate, it's that my opinions are based solely on extended time with the demo. I've played through it now twice as methodically as possible, as well as defeated the boss challenge 3 separate times. However, I will say this. If playing Korean-developed games has taught me anything, it's that they really do listen to fan feedback in terms of mechanics. Just last year, NeoWiz Games did some fine-tune adjustments to Lies of P's combat, tweaking the timing of P's dodge. And that minor adjustment really did inform how the final version of that game ultimately shaped out. Who knows how Stellar Blade will evolve? It's also worth mentioning I might be in the minority with how the gameplay comes together. Kyle Hilliard at Game Informer seems to really enjoy the game's more methodical approach to how Eve controls in combat. And if you're someone who disagrees with me too, then hey, I think that's awesome. In fact, I'd even encourage you to let me know down in the comments what you think about the game so far. Gameplay is king. And when movement in a game feels satisfying to control, then mechanics really do reign supreme. Fluidity, mobility, animation, responsiveness. All things that make up satisfying movement mechanics and the overall feel of the moment-to-moment gameplay loop. As a modern example, we can look to first-person shooters and their gradual shift toward high-mobility movement. While mechanics like slide canceling may be a point of contention among Call of Duty fans, it's the updates to ongoing games to include higher mobility that'll make users on Twitter quote the now-tired comparison to EA's Titanfall 2.
Say the line, Bart! I didn't do it. Yay!
And while these comparisons can at times be fairly reductive or derivative, the zeitgeist of mobility mechanics is what allows for more innovation within the genre. Hoverboard flipping, grapple hook flying, and platforming while shooting waves of enemies in Echo Point Nova makes for a highly thrilling and engaging gameplay loop that feels unique against other shooters. And the word unique really is the qualifying word here. It's what you do with your inspirations that'll ultimately define your title. And unfortunately for Stellar Blade, I'm not sure there was enough done to make the game mechanically feel like it stands out. It's clear that Stellar Blade is operating heavily from its inspirations, with the developers at Shift Up pointing directly at their citations. In an interview with IGN, developer Kim Hyung-tae details the games the team pulled from when developing their approach to combat. Platinum's Bayonetta and FromSoft's Sekiro. It's an interesting place to position their game, somewhere between character action and the amorphous, almost rhythm-like combat that is Souls-like. On paper, it even sounds like something that pairs nicely, but in practice, the game ultimately feels like it's under tension, stuck somewhere in between the two with not enough of a clear position to truly stand on its own.
I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
I'll say it up front. I don't think Stellar Blade should have been a Souls-like. It's a design pitfall that many studios, despite their attempt, can never really get right. Honestly, Lies of P is probably the closest at emulating From Software, but that unfortunately forced a certain amount of design compromises to be made, as much of that game focuses on the replication of systems and mechanics and not on true innovation. In regard to Stellar Blade, however, it's that the language of movement in combat largely comes across as slow and stiff in contrast to the stylized aesthetics and animation of the game overall. In wanting to leverage the popularity of From Software combat design principles, they've placed Stellar Blade in contrast to what the world is demanding. And you can feel it in the minute-to-minute gameplay as you walk around the world and encounter smaller enemies. It's all a bit too grounded in slowness. And this isn't to say the combat is bad in and of itself. The methodical approach can actually really work once you get into a groove with some of the bosses. I'm sure enemy variety and increased difficulty later on in the game will gradually make the game shine. However, the issue is that much of the game's overall feel seemingly comes through the various upgrades you can get for Eve and not as baseline mechanics from the jump. This was immediately apparent when I confronted the bosses available in the demo. What I thought was mostly the colloquial skill issue as I struggled to fight Abaddon at the top of the parking garage turned out to be somewhat of a skill tree gatekeep, as confronting the Stalker in the boss challenge unlocked several of Eve's later abilities. Dodging was the absolute biggest discrepancy, as one of the major unlocks you can get is the ability to press circle again to dodge a second time. This fundamentally had a major impact on combat flow and the game's overall feel, even within the short encounter. Eve was faster. I could get out of the way of rapid incoming attacks. I could perfect dodge incoming projectiles at a more successful rate. And this made me think, why was this an upgrade? Why isn't this available as a base mechanic? We know Eve is capable of performing feats of insane agility. Why not an additional sidestep? Kratos in the God of War reboot duology has a similar moveset. 1 press for sidestep, 2 presses for dodge roll. And while God of War isn't as methodical as Stellar Blade, the design approach is fairly similar. Santa Monica wants you grounded as Kratos. The intimacy of the camera plays a large role in that grounding. So what's the difference? Simply, engaging with base mechanics. As a player, you have to learn when it's best to sidestep and counter with a light attack, and when to dodge roll out of the way from bigger incoming threats. Engaging with the two drives the learning curve. Stellar Blade, conversely, feels like I'm being held back by artificial upgrades, which, even when compared to its inspiration of Sekiro, is still insanely at odds against itself. In Sekiro, we have our initial tools and that's kind of it. It's up to us to get better as we come to understand how we engage with base mechanics. Hell, even Elden Ring, with its various builds, fundamentally still boils back down to one thing. And it's not a skill tree you use to upgrade your Tarnished. It's climbing up the combat learning curve through the practice of combat mechanics. It's us who get better.
And this makes me think about Infamous Second Son and The Last of Us Part 2. And no, I'm not just bringing both of those games up because they're set in Seattle and I'm at the Space Needle. Okay, I'm bringing both of those games up because they're set in Seattle and I'm at the Space Needle. You see that, by the way? Can you?
In Infamous, despite gaining new abilities throughout the course of the story, traversal and movement is still largely the same, with an emphasis on mobility and verticality. And despite The Last of Us's grounded approach, Naughty Dog leveraged Ellie's frame by implementing dodge mechanics, creating a new sense of combat flow that fits within the aesthetics of the game. Stellar Blade just feels off. And I think this is largely due to the game's biggest inspiration, NIER Automata. Both NIER and Bayonetta are, to varying degrees, character action games. They're fast, fluid, and intense. They both feel good to play. By ripping some of the stylized approach from both of these games and placing them in the design of Stellar Blade, you get a game that ostensibly looks like it should play much faster than it ultimately ends up playing as. And while the hyper-stylization in the animation and marketing certainly looks cool, you never truly feel like you're playing at that level in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Yeah, Eve is highly acrobatic in combat animations, but try platforming off a roof and onto a railing, and you'll feel the tension I'm describing from behind the sticks. So, yes, even though the combat does have its moments, the fundamental movement mechanics just make the game feel like something is wrong. And that kind of sucks. In 2008, EA published Mirror's Edge, a first-person parkour game developed by DICE, the same studio that also worked on the Battlefield series. It reviewed fairly well, but the cultural reception for it was, unfortunately, unremarkable. The game didn't sell all that well. EA was less than impressed with its critical reception. The narrative leaves much to be desired. The production and presentation of the story through budget-friendly toon animation feels more like the eSurance commercials of the 2000s rather than the cutscenes of most third-party games. And the combat is, well, serviceable at best. So why is it that in 2024, it's now a cult classic icon of a game? In a word, movement. From its inception, developing Mirror's Edge was an uphill battle. Former DICE CEO Patrick Soderlund was not impressed with the pitch, and EA had little faith in the title. Battlefield was the main draw. Why make anything else? But there was a team that believed they had something special in their hands. They knew what they were making was not only fun to play, but unique against the landscape of the industry. No other games were doing it like this. The internal tech demo for how Mirror's Edge played sent waves of excitement through the company. So, when DICE doubled down with a hyper-clean, minimalist cityscape art style, they had a game that not only felt unique, but looked the part too. It created a feedback loop where the game's aesthetics and design reinforced the gameplay, pleasing on the eyes and on the thumbsticks. In an interview with Polygon, Soderlund says, "At the time, I remember looking at a lot of games, and they all kind of looked the same. I challenged the team in art direction. Whenever someone looked at a screenshot of the game, I want them to understand immediately what game it was." The end result won Soderlund over. Today, Mirror's Edge movement still stands out against the mechanics of most other contemporary games. It just feels good. And it's not just that Faith's moveset feels fluid as we parkour around the city, but that the game's levels are designed around how a player chooses to interact with the world. Despite its linearity, there are usually multiple paths for how you can parkour from A to B. Runner vision helps guide you, but the freedom is how you choose to move around this space. You can climb over a fence or find a nearby platform, jumping over the top while tucking in your feet to make the vault over. You can platform across air conditioning units to reach a platform, or run against an adjacent wall, glance over, and jump across to reach the ledge with outstretched arms. For fun, you can jump on your back and click crouch at just the right time to roll back onto your feet. Function and style. In a way, the approach to Mirror's Edge movement reminds me of the design principle of Mario Odyssey. Movement mechanics that support platforming and interactivity. In Odyssey, Mario's jump is just one layer you can build off of to create strings of movement to platform around the kingdoms. Mechanics so involved with each other that tech jumping guides for speedrunning Odyssey get 1 million views on YouTube. Jump, throw cappy, dive is where complexity begins. Of course, there are no power-ups or abilities in Mirror's Edge. It's not that involved. but the sandbox-esque levels designed around how we engage with mechanics is what makes the game feel so fun and so involved. Even with barely serviceable combat, Mirror's Edge still finds a way to be fun. You don't have to fight the enemies Faith comes across in the game. Well, mostly. A majority of the time, with well-timed parkour, most combat encounters will see you avoiding enemies altogether. The puzzle of the game now extends beyond how do you get from point A to point B to how do you get from point A to point B while avoiding Officer X and Y. The language of gameplay shines with how we leverage the basic movement mechanics available to us. I can't help but think about Stellar Blade in this regard, where the best feeling approaches to combat come with those upgrades we'll unlock later in the game. Yeah, it's cool to chain a well-timed dodge with a beta counterattack, but gameplay feeling shouldn't come as a reward through latent unlocks. It should be present from our initial button presses. In contrast, it's no wonder Mirror's Edge stands out as much as it does. Spectacle comes not from the awe of flashy animations, but from the basic input of the game's mechanics and how we choose to engage with the world. When Faith jumps off a building and rolls on top of an adjacent roof to cushion her fall, we feel that rush. Adrenaline and enjoyment as a result of mechanics. Fundamental movement mechanics cannot be understated. They have to feel good and help us engage with the game that's being designed. A big reason why I fell off Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is that I found gatekeeping many traversal mechanics as discoverable abilities hindered my initial enjoyment. The game still felt good, sure, but the language of movement was drastically limited to make way for the Metroidvania design. Largely though, I think we're in a time where game feel is a pillar for how movement informs gameplay experience. Games like Dragon's Dogma 2 and Content Warning feel intentionally weighty and constrained. For the latter, that level of stiffness and jank is actually part of the humor and charm the game wants to evoke.
Love you, boys.
Whoa! You're so stupid. I love that bit. Oh shit, where'd he fall? Did he die?
The shooting, running, diving, and crawling of Helldivers 2 doesn't just get clipped and shared on TikTok. It gets comparisons to Metal Gear Solid 5, one of the best mechanically feeling games ever made. Even small, supposed streamer ragebait titles like A Difficult Game About Climbing forefront mechanics as the sole draw for the game. Hell, Game Maker's Toolkit recently put out a YouTube video analyzing the movement mechanics of Jusant and how leveraging a few simple mechanics made this feeling of rock climbing and gaming more thrilling than ever before. Movement titles will soon be ubiquitous. At the time of writing, I have not one, but 2 separate parkour games in my purview from independent developers. Actually, there's even another dystopian character action sword melee game called NIER I've been watching the development cycle of. And what titles like these seemingly understand is that how a game feels to play, many times, largely informs the overall experience. Despite all of Mirror's Edge's shortcomings with narrative and combat, the shelf life of the game still continues nearly 16 years later because of the elevated craft of how it feels to play. In the test of time, it's the attention to movement mechanics that forefronts experience and enjoyment. So, how do we reckon with Stellar Blade? The reality is, as with most conclusions across my videos, we'll have to engage with the game on the terms it's setting. On that front, I have no doubt the game will be enjoyable. It already sort of was. Remember the boss challenge from the demo I mentioned like 10 minutes ago? Even Yoko Taro, the creator of NIER, thinks Stellar Blade is going to be great. Tell you what, let's even circle back here in a week once the game is out, and you can comment on how wrong I actually ended up being. I'll own it. But really, I do think that even if the gameplay eventually and fundamentally is good, that the technical critique will forever still stand. Movement in Stellar Blade does not really feel good. It's a problem that was created from Shift Up's approach to design. to develop a game that exists in the liminal space between the character action of NIER and Bayonetta and the Souls-like of Sekiro. A real rock and hard place predicament I don't know you can retroactively get yourself out of. Upgrades will only treat the symptom and not the cause. But who knows? Maybe Stellar Blade sells 3 million copies and is a big success. Maybe it's received well enough that it gets a sequel that leans heavier on other character action titles. Maybe Shift Up finally looks at one of the character action game GOATs as it looks for further inspiration for movement and combat mechanics. Yes, I'm talking about Metal Gear Rising, people. But until then, let me know what you think. Does Stellar Blade feel good to play? And does it need to for the game to come together mechanically? I'll be waiting for you down in the comments. I'm Christian, this is Save Room, and we'll see you on the next one.